Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We have exclusive new reporting on a story that has turned Washington upside down and caused more intrigue than anything in the city I've seen in 25 years. As, of course, you've heard, independent counsel Robert Mueller's investigation has zeroed in on its first targets. Today, former Donald Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his business associate Rick Gates were both indicted on charges of money laundering, tax fraud, and failure to report lobbying arrangements. Now, the indictment, among other things, offers tantalizing details about how foreign lobbying actually works at the highest levels in Washington, how Manafort allegedly used laundered offshore cash to buy Range Rovers, expand his wardrobe, somehow spend $655,000 on landscaping for his house in the Hamptons. Manafort's indictment comes as, honestly, no surprise to anyone who's been in Washington for a while and has watched him operate, though, of course, the legal system will make the final call on that. It's pretty clear, though, that Paul Manafort is just the first in a series of people in D.C. who are suddenly in deep, deep trouble. Who's next? Well, reading between the lines of the indictment and talking to a number of our own sources, we think we've got a pretty good idea of that. Keep in mind that today's indictment never mentions Donald Trump's presidential campaign or the 2016 election. It only mentions Russia in passing, even though Russian meddling was the pretext for this investigation in the first place. Instead, the indictment catalogs Manafort's efforts to lobby on behalf of pro-Russia groups in Ukraine. The indictment goes into great detail on the relationship between Manafort and two mysterious groups described in the document as Company A and Company B. Those companies, we can report tonight, are Mercury LLC, that's led by former Republican Congressman Vin Weber, and the Podesta Group, founded by Tony Podesta and his brother John, whom you'll remember as Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. None of this will come as a shock to viewers of this show. Last Tuesday, we told you that the Mueller investigation is no longer primarily a search for Russian collusion in the 2016 race. It is now a much far-reaching inquiry into corrupt lobbying practices across D.C., one that is very likely to ensnare figures close to Hillary Clinton. In press accounts, Mueller's investigation is still framed as a hunt for collusion between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and the government of Russia. Our source says investigators are, in fact, very interested in Manafort's behavior while he ran the Trump campaign, but otherwise that description is mostly bogus. The investigation has broadened now to determine which people and which organizations in Washington have spent years working secretly as de facto operatives on behalf of Russian government and business interests. The Podesta Group is chief among these. Quote, they are more focused on facilitators of Russian influence in this country, says our source, than they are on election collusion. The Podesta Group, he says, quote, is in their crosshairs. Well, that segment, which ran last week, provoked a snarling legal threat from Tony Podesta today, designed to shut us up. That's not going to happen, obviously, but we'll tell you a lot more about it in just a minute. Last week, we explained how Paul Manafort used a sham group called the European Center for a Modern Ukraine to lobby on behalf of pro-Russian forces in Ukraine. Those forces sought a number of changes to American policy, changes to the Republican platform, for example. Some of the changes are obviously contrary to America's interests and values. Among them, they wanted the U.S. government to support the imprisonment of one of the Ukraine president's political opponents. Shady does not begin to describe this operation. Even some of Tony Podesta's own employees thought the whole thing was disgusting. Well, today's indictment confirms our reporting on this. It describes the Center for Modern Ukraine as a fake organization, merely, quote, a mouthpiece for the Ukrainian president, Yanukovych. The indictment also confirms that the lobbying groups Manafort hired in Washington, including Tony Podesta's, knew perfectly well that the Center for the Modern Ukraine was fake when they signed on to represent it. According to the feds, Podesta's company was told explicitly they would be lobbying on behalf of the Ukrainian president. In November 2012, the indictment says, Manafort's business partner explicitly requested reports on lobbying activity by both those companies so that he could brief the president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, on what they were doing. It couldn't get dirtier. But despite apparently knowing they were acting as foreign agents, agents of a foreign government, the Podesta Group never registered as foreign agents. Failure to do that is against the law. In April 2012, the Podesta Group filed documents with Congress relating to its work with the Center for a Modern Ukraine. At the time, they falsely claimed that group was just a foreign NGO. The Podesta Group's filing contained a declaration by the Center for Modern Ukraine that, quote, None of the activities of the center are directly or indirectly supervised, directed, controlled, financed, or subsidized in whole or in part by a government of a foreign country or a foreign political party. That declaration, false, was endorsed as true by Kimberly Fritz, now the CEO of the Podesta Group and a former Jeb Bush staffer. All apparently a lie. Moreover, according to today's indictment, the Podesta Group must have known it was a lie when they signed that document. Under the law, the firm should have immediately registered with the government, the U.S. government, under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Instead, the Podesta Group waited until spring 2017, this year, to do that, and then somehow applied the status retroactively. By that point, the Center for a Modern Ukraine had effectively been out of business for 3 years. It was a little late. Interestingly, the Podesta Group filed those late papers just weeks after media outlets began reporting that law enforcement was investigating Manafort's offshore bank accounts. Connection? But wait, why would Ukrainian interests hire Tony Podesta in the first place? Well, according to a former Podesta employee we spoke to over this weekend, even foreign officials in distant lands understood that Tony Podesta's brother was John Podesta, a key Clinton confidant. It was widely known the two brothers had dinner together every Sunday night. Quote, "That's not something we hid from clients of the firm. They loved hearing that." Even a native Russian speaker could grasp the point of all of this. The Podesta Group was hired by Paul Manafort on behalf of foreign clients because the company was perceived to have a direct line to powerful politicians. John Podesta was Hillary's campaign chairman. Tony Podesta had been friends with Bill Clinton since the midterm elections of 1970. Influence peddling 101. How central were the Podesta's political connections to their profit model? Consider this. The firm's billing dropped dramatically almost immediately after Hillary Clinton lost the race for president. That tells you a lot. Mueller's investigators apparently have figured this out. Today, Tony Podesta resigned as head of his company. His excuse? Us. That's right, he blamed us. In his parting statement, Podesta said this, quote, "It is impossible to run a public affairs firm while you're under attack by Fox News and the right-wing media." Well, Podesta isn't just complaining about us, though. He's threatening us. This afternoon, we got a letter from Jeff Garanther. He's a lawyer with Venable LLP, a big law firm here in D.C. The letter demands that this show, quote, "immediately cease and desist disseminating false and misleading reports about Mr. Podesta and the Podesta Group. It demands we retract and delete all our prior reporting on the Podesta Group and warns that if we don't do this, quote, Mr. Podesta may pursue legal action, including for damages, in order to fully protect his rights." The letter doesn't stop there, though. It also warns us that we will face legal action under the Copyright Act merely for quoting from this letter publicly, as we just did. The most amusing line, though, is this one. Quote, "Paul Manafort did not work with the Podesta Group in its representation of the European Center for a Modern Ukraine." That's what the lawyer's letters told us. Apparently that lawyer hasn't read the Manafort indictment yet. In paragraph 22 of that indictment, we read this, quote, "At the direction of Manafort and Gates, companies A and B engaged in extensive lobbying on Ukraine." The indictment also says that the Podesta Group and Mercury were selected personally by Paul Manafort to lobby on behalf of Ukrainian interests. So if John Podesta's legal team has a complaint, it's not with us, it's with the Department of Justice and the Mueller investigation. But maybe we're being too literal about this, probably so. Podesta's lawyer wasn't trying to inform us of anything, but to threaten us, to shut down our reporting on his client. One lawyer we talked to earlier today said the Podesta people have used this tactic with others before. It's common. It's an effort to use fear to control press coverage. We're not intimidated. We have ample evidence from Mueller's indictment and from a number of confidential sources to paint a pretty clear picture of exactly what the Podesta Group was doing for years here in Washington. We'll let the facts speak for themselves. And we're confident the Mueller investigation will be revealing a lot more about Tony Podesta's lobbying practices in the near future. In the meantime, if you're looking for a summary of all of this, here's the one-sentence cliff note to the whole affair. The chairman of one major presidential campaign colluded with the brother of the chairman of the other major presidential campaign to enrich themselves by secretly advancing the interests of a foreign adversary. That happened. That's the swamp they told you needed to be drained. Jonathan Turley teaches law right in the middle of the swamp. He's a professor at George Washington University Law School, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Turley, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So you don't often hear of people prosecuted for violating the FARA Act, the legal requirement to register as a foreign lobbyist when you lobby for a foreign government. A lot of people here do it. Relatively few register. Why is that unenforced?
Well, it's only been a handful of prosecutions, and to have it in this mix is odd. It's like, being chased by a bunch of Rottweilers and a Chihuahua. It's not exactly a fierce charge to face, but it was brought in this case, and I think it sends a signal to others like Flynn, like Tony Podesta, that these are charges that could be brought. I think this indictment is saying that the special counsel is prepared to indict anyone for anything within his mandate. But he's clearly focusing on these types of financial transactions and registration violations. Now, FARA violations are a bit deadly in one sense, and that is some of these violations are registration violations. Jurors tend to treat those as basically cut and dry. If they're convinced that you had to file, then you're guilty. So you can secure these types of convictions, but they're in a mix with very serious crimes.
Well, but they seem serious. I mean, look, this whole investigation appears to be focused on the question of foreign influence. How do foreign governments affect American policy?
Yeah.
The decisions our government makes. And there is a law, it seems to be a meaningful one, saying if you're doing the bidding of a foreign power, you have to tell us about it. Why is that considered a small violation?
Well, it's small because it's often been dealt with administratively. When you violate it, the response, like the Podesta group did, was to retroactively file, and the Department of Justice has allowed that. Clearly, Mueller is not following that pattern. He is taking the view that, if you violated FARA, we can charge you criminally, we will. It'd be hard not to see that charge brought against people like Flynn. You could white out Manafort's name and put in Flynn and basically use that same paragraph. For
the work he did for the Erdogan government in
That's
Turkey.
right.
Yeah.
And so this is a signal to others that these charges are likely to be brought.
So if FARA violations are basically looked past and you can retroactively file 4 or 5 years and call it good, this is an editorial comment, but I'm just interested in your view. Maybe that's one of the reasons D.C. is so corrupt, just throwing that out there?
Well, when this first happened, when we went into the Russian money, my first response was, Washington's awash with Russian money. And the public are about to see that. This city has a real sordid side to it.
And not just Russian money.
Absolutely. And people do influence peddle, and it's not exclusive to any particular party. And so I think what the Democrats are going to experience with the Republicans is that investigations are a lot like Saturn. They devour their own. And you're going to see an expansion here, clearly, bringing in other people. And the focus does appear by Mueller to be on the lobbying aspect, and you're right. This could actually be a historic this series of disclosures for the public. I think the public has no idea the level of influence peddling in Washington.
And I don't care who's swept up in it. If you're working on behalf of a foreign power against American interests, I hope you're exposed. I really do.
Well, I think they will be.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks,
John Shirley. Great to see you. Congressman Eric Swalwell is a Democrat representing the state of California. He joins us tonight. Congressman Swalwell, have you ever had contact with people from the Podesta group?
Well, I mean, yes, I've met Tony Podesta and John Podesta before, but
Tony Podesta is the one who runs it. John Podesta is just his brother.
But Tucker,
but I'm wondering.
The name you should mention is George Papadopoulos. You didn't mention that name. He pled guilty to working with the Russians and then lying about it to the FBI.
That is absolutely right. You're not. Well, I mean, I think there are many stories of the day, and this is not simply the story of the day. It's the story of the last 30 years that I've been in D.C., where foreign governments control what the U.S. government does, and nobody out there beyond Washington even knows that it's going on.
But only one team is under investigation working with the Russians.
That's actually, that's not true.
That's
actually
true.
Look, it's not even about teams.
Russia attacked our democracy. Today, someone pled guilty to lying about working with the Russians.
We now know that the Podesta group, and by the way, Mercury, which is run by a former Republican congressman, I'm not flacking for them. I'm just being honest. I think it's a big deal if foreign powers give money to lobbyists and then it changes the way the rest of us live, and we don't know about it.
Well, Podesta Group's never given money to me, but what I do know is the Russians worked to help Donald Trump get elected. Donald Trump's team went over to Russia and tried to receive information about Hillary Clinton. But we also know from the indictment today, we know that from the indictment today
that Paul Manafort, who chaired Trump's campaign, but was working with this Democratic firm to influence members of Congress. We don't know which members of Congress because you guys haven't disclosed it. Why should the Congress be allowed to hide their meetings with foreign lobbyists from the public?
Well, they never worked with me.
No, I'm asking a serious question. I'm not accusing you.
Yeah.
But, there are a lot of, 534 other people in both houses, and they meet with foreign lobbyists, and they don't have to disclose it. Why is that?
I'm all in favor of as much disclosure as possible.
But why doesn't it happen now?
And that's why it's so frustrating that Donald Trump's team lied over and over and over about their contacts with Russia.
You're part of a body
and now
that is
been exposed.
Hold on, that is routine. Look, this is in the process of being exposed. This stuff is going on at many levels.
Doesn't that bother you?
A lot. That's why I'm asking you these questions. And you're part of it, because the body you serve in hides it from the public. Why is Congress allowed to hide meetings with foreign lobbyists from the public? I don't understand that.
I am doggedly focused right now on a country that attacked us.
Yes.
A campaign that worked
including in the
with that
Congress where
country,
you work.
And making
you're
sure
part
that
of
that's
this.
exposed.
No,
so
I'm asking you.
again.
I'm asking you.
Yeah.
I'm
in favor of more disclosure.
But how about total disclosure? How about if a foreign lobbyist from Russia or any other country, Turkey, any country, meets with any member of Congress or their staff, why isn't it disclosed now?
It should be.
But why isn't it?
It should be.
What have you done?
The Republicans are in the majority. If we have a majority,
Look, I agree.
I'll be the first to run out there and say, let's do that.
Well, I haven't heard you mention that, though.
Yeah.
It's almost like Congress has a special carve-out where you can kind of do whatever you want, no one knows.
You know, I have an issue right now where I'm trying to get, as much progress on an investigation where barriers are being put up every day.
I think Congress is erecting its... Well, hold on. No. The investigation today told us, and it's in the indictment. I know you read all 31 pages. I did, spellbound this morning.
There's actually more pages than that. There are 14 pages of a guilty plee of a guy who was a senior foreign policy advisor who Donald Trump called an excellent guy.
Well, if he was a senior foreign policy advisor at the age of 30, for no pay. I mean,
well, that's the president's judgment, not ours.
Well, okay, look. But I'm just saying, the indictment says that these guys, Manafort, who just got indicted today, Gates, who worked for him, hired these two firms, primarily, I think, the Podesta Group, and the Podesta people sent lobbyists up to the Hill to lobby on behalf of pro-Russian Ukrainian politicians. They met with a bunch of different members of Congress. When are we going to find out who they met with?
Yeah, after we find out who on Donald Trump's team
What do you mean?
worked
What do you mean
Russia,
after? You're in Congress
right now. Why they continue to obstruct.
Why are you obstructing it?
Because
why don't you go up there and demand Nancy Pelosi order every Democratic member who met with a Podesta Group rep on behalf of Ukraine to admit it?
Do you think this is more important than our democracy being attacked and still being under attack?
This is our democracy being attacked. It's the Congress, our legislative body in which you serve, met with Russian agents, and they're not telling us who. And I don't know why. At the very moment we're talking about, what did Russia do to hack our democracy?
Anyone
you
who
were part of it.
Should say that they met with a Russian agent.
No, it shouldn't be voluntary, because what member of Congress say, oh, by the way, I was part of the hacking of our democracy? Why don't you make them?
Russia. Not Russia.
You're calling me Russia. I love it.
We're under attack. We need to stop a country.
And you were standing right at ground zero for that attack. And I mean, you were right there. Don't act like this was happening in someone else's Congress. This was the American Congress. Well, I'm not saying it was. I'm saying you're here as not just a congressman, but a member of a larger body, a member of Congress that was implicated today officially by the Justice Department as part of this conspiracy to subvert our democracy.
Let me tell you
I'm asking, what are you doing?
I'm under. A country attacked us. A presidential campaign worked with that country. I can't even get my Republican colleagues to be curious enough to understand.
Really? Well, let's
challenge.
start a moment of bipartisan comedy, as they used to call it, with a T, not D. And why don't we both agree that every member of Congress should voluntarily tomorrow morning reveal every foreign agent he or she has met with in the last 10 years?
Great.
Let's call for that right now.
More disclosure.
Will you do that?
Yeah.
No, not more disclosure.
I'll tweet it at you tomorrow morning.
Specific disclosure.
You'll hear it from
Why don't you look into the camera and say, my colleagues, if you met with the Podesta Group's agents of Ukraine, please admit it.
My colleagues should worry about a democracy that was attacked and a presidential campaign that covers it up. That's the most important thing.
What about a Congress that covers it up? The campaign's over. The Congress is still there, I noticed.
Let's get traction on that, because that's our democracy.
How much money do you think Tony Podesta gave to the DCCC last year? Did you take any money from them?
Tucker, no.
He gave $30,000. And I'm wondering, all the people who are benefiting from Russian money flowing through the Podesta Group, are they going to give it back?
Let's just talk American to American.
I am. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying the Congress of the United
Politics aside.
was subverted. No, it's not political.
Do you agree that Russia attacked us?
It sounds like they were up and walking the halls of your building, suborning members.
That the Trump campaign has lied about the contacts they had with Russia?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like a guy got indicted today. You don't see me defending that. I do see you
everything we can to make sure it never happens again?
Yeah, by starting within their own backyard, admitting their own complicity in this.
I didn't come here to defend one person. I came here to defend America.
You didn't come here. You didn't come here to have the truth thrown at you, which is the body in which you serve is every bit as much as the problem as any other body in Washington. The Congress is influenced by foreign powers all the time, and you know it, and they won't admit it.
I think a Trump campaign worked with the foreign power. Now we have to unwind.
All right,
figure out what happened.
That's great. We'll get those members of Congress. Congressman, you're a brave man, as always, to come up. We can never get Democrat except for you. Thank you. Ooh. Why have calls to investigate Hillary Clinton's connection to the Russians been ignored for months? We'll investigate that ourselves, because we have no choice. Stay tuned.